Hi, everybody. This is a meeting of the Dizang Bosal Book Club. We're talking about Dizang Bosal, also known as Jizo or Dizang or Ksitigarbha. And in particular, we're talking about a book by a Buddhist scholar who's also a Buddhist nun named Zhiru. She's written a book called The Making of a Savior Bodhisattva, Dizang in Medieval China. And we're going to be talking about chapter 5 of that book, which is about stories about Dizang in medieval China. But before we do that, we will do what we always do at the beginning of each of these classes and chant the Dizang Bosal chant together. Okay, so I almost clicked on the wrong button and ended the meeting for all. But I managed not to do that. Okay, so now I do have some slides prepared on the subject that we're covering tonight. Before if anybody has anything you want to bring up or any questions or something you want to share with the group, that's fine to do now or at any point during the class. We'll go until about 8:15. Got a little bit of a late start because of some confusion on my part as to whether or not I had sent out the correct link to everybody. But let's see. Before going to, oh, here it is. Good. Before going to my slides, it's always kind of a good thing to look at the, just make sure everybody is on the same page or at least on the same book. This is the book that we're, as a little joke, you know, people say, I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. And I often think, I don't think we're even all reading the same book, you know. So this is the book, The Making of a Savior Bodhisattva, Dizang in Medieval China by Zhiru. So I think she prefers just to go by Zhiru, although I think Ing is her family name, and as a monastic, she doesn't use that, but sometimes just because people often like to have a first and a last name, I will sometimes refer to it as Zhiru Ing, but I think she goes just by Zhiru as her monastic name. And we are now on chapter 5, which is kind of it innocently titled a narrative literature. As you get into it, you find out that what it's mostly about is about miracle stories, and sometimes up to and involving people coming back from the dead. Um, so let's talk about that. Personally, I think that this chapter is pretty straightforward. It's stories. It's kind of they're very interesting stories. They're kind of weird stories, um, but I would say this is one of the, at least in my opinion, one of the easier chapters to read and pretty straightforward in terms of the actual content. And so a lot of what I want to talk about is going into some of the background. Why are we talking about miracle tales? Why are we talking about people coming back from the dead, or what happens to people after they die? What does that have to do with, and so, I mean, when it comes to this particular bodhisattva, it's pretty obvious that what happens to you after you're dead is a big deal. It's part of Dizang's primary job description. The chant that we do at the beginning of this class is the chant that Buddhists do when someone has died, with the idea that Zhiru Bosal will help those who have died in their journey from one lifetime to the next. That journey is very important because the end point of that journey is your next life. And so, let's see. Now, what I'm going to slideshow, start from current slide. All right. So, in this particular chapter, there is a lot of weird stuff. And there's often weird things that are associated with this particular bodhisattva, Zhiru Bosal. And really, if you get into traditional Buddhism, traditional Buddhism as an actual Buddhism, as it's actually practiced by people in, the vast majority of Buddhists throughout the world, not just in Asia, but now people around the world, there's a lot of weird stuff. So there's a lot of weird stuff in Buddhism. Sometimes people tend to view this weird stuff in what I consider to be kind of a two-dimensional way, and they simply ask, is this true or not? You either believe it or you don't. Zen Master Sung believed that he could just look at a person, look at their face and look in their eyes, and diagnose diseases and prescribe medicine simply based on that. I know people who went through that with him, who were told, "Oh, you have such and such a problem with your liver, and you need to take this medicine or eat something." And many of his students would not necessarily, follow up on that, but it was something that he definitely believed. And what I'm calling two-dimensional is really reducing this kind of thing to simply a question, a yes or no question of, does this really work? But there's another, what I would think of as, I guess I'm calling a third dimension to this, is how does it work? Or even, you can even maintain your objectivity or skepticism and say, how is this supposed to work? And this question isn't just for people like Zen Master Sung, who, in addition to being a very knowledgeable of and practitioner of traditional medicine, East Asian medicine, was also an adept of feng shui. In fact, the temple at Furnace Mountain, the precise location of the meditation hall at Furnace Mountain was determined by Zen Master Sung using feng shui. And Isaac Newton, Robert Boyle, you might know that if you know anything about the history of science, these names will be familiar. Johannes Kepler, Galileo Galilei, Tycho Brahe, Carl Linnaeus, and many others all believed in weird things themselves, like astrology and alchemy. And I'm intentionally using the adjective weird here in order to avoid using words like magic or supernatural, which are kind of loaded. So this chapter that we're talking about, as I said, is innocently entitled narrative literature, but really it's about weird tales, or what in Japanese are called Jiguai. This is somehow something like how it's pronounced in Mandarin. Jigui is something like how it would be pronounced in Korean, which literally means records of the strange. But before going down into that particular rabbit hole, there's another one that I want to go into first. And as as I don't know, you can get into really, as Zen Master Sung San would say, you can really make people's minds move when you start talking about these kinds of things, miracles, um, people coming back from the dead. Another way to get people's minds to really move is to talk about whether or not Buddhists have to believe in anything at all. Uh, and so I just want to point out that first of all, that it isn't necessary to believe in that there is another life after this one, as there were other lives before this one. Um, that isn't necessary to believe. In the four great vows, we say Dharma gates are countless. I vow to learn them all, and these 84,000 Dharma gates, these are teachings of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, but in particular, they are all the teachings of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are meant for us, for deluded sentient beings. So they have to be comprehensible and also attractive. If the teachings of the Buddha didn't attract people, and if they weren't comprehensible to people, then they wouldn't be of any use to anyone. But at the same time, they also have to be true. So there's another word for this. In addition, it's talking about Dharma gates. One often encounters this Sanskrit term upaya, which is often translated into English as skillful means. The Chinese word for upaya is very interesting. It's fang bian. Again, that's something like the Mandarin pronunciation, the Korean pronunciation, something like bang pian. The reason why this is a very interesting Chinese term is because it's a combination of one character that means honest and another character that means convenient. So what this points to is that upaya doesn't, it's not like some sort of little white lie that you tell to somebody for their own good, um, uh, even though it's not really true. So there's the most famous example of upaya in Buddhism, or at least in Mahayana Buddhism, is the story from can't remember whether it's the second or third chapter of the Lotus Sutra. This is a famous story about a father whose sons are inside of a burning building, and they won't leave. And the father cannot get them to leave, cannot convince them to leave, and they're having a great time inside this burning building. And so the father yells into the building and tells his sons that he has gifts for them outside. He has very nice, well, so at the time, this story is told by the Buddha 2,500 years ago. Um, the father promises them really nice chariots. It would be the equivalent of promising them really nice cars today. And the thing is that in the story, when the sons come out of the burning building, there really are chariots there for them. It wasn't a trick. Um, uh, it was a trick in a way because the father wanted them to get out of the burning building because it was burning. They wouldn't leave just because he told them that the building was on fire and they were in danger. And so he used a skillful means, an upaya. But the upaya, again, was real. Anyway, so it is fine to tell people that in Buddhism, you don't have to believe in karma and rebirth. You don't have to believe in well, hardly anything at all. But it is wrong to say that the Buddha did not teach these things, which is this is why I've got Stephen Batchelor up there. His version of Buddhism is very attractive to many people because many people don't want to take what they consider to be all of the baggage of Buddhism. And so that would be a skillful means, except for the fact that Stephen Batchelor is telling people that this is actually what the Buddha taught, which in fact Stephen Batchelor knows. I mean, Stephen Batchelor is actually quite a gifted and important scholar of Buddhism, and he knows that every school of Buddhism has always taught karma and rebirth. And so Stephen Batchelor is in essence claiming to have some sort of supernatural ability to know what the Buddha did teach, even though all of the records that we have of what the Buddha taught or something else. Anyway, so the point is that there's nothing wrong with people not believing in the kind of stuff that we're going to be talking about in this chapter of Zhiru's book, or reincarnation or rebirth or karma or hell realms or heavenly realms. It's perfectly fine for people to not believe in those things. But and you can say, well, those teachings of the Buddha, you can think of them whatever you want, which is consistent with the way the Buddha taught. But at the same time, it shouldn't be denied that is what the Buddha taught. Okay, all right. So, but back to the other rabbit hole, that I first mentioned, which is how is something like that supposed to work? So a lot of the stories that Zhiru recounts in this chapter have to do with people who have died, and then other people pray for them after they die, which the Jijang Bosal chant is a good example of that, of a type of prayer or practice that people do for to help others. And then in a dream, someone who has been praying for a dead loved one will have a dream where they uh, uh, either see that person or are told by some Buddha or Bodhisattva where their mother or father or loved one has been reborn, and it's a good place. Okay, so it's kind of a double miracle where you've managed to help someone to get a good rebirth, and then you also are given miraculously this information. So how could something like that possibly work? So this is picture of Kim Iryeop. She's a really fascinating figure, not just in Korean Buddhism, but actually back in the uh, 30s, 40s, 50s, and even before that, and after that, she was one of the most famous people in Korea. She was a very famous person, a celebrity. She was an extremely successful writer and also a prominent political activist. She was one of the original, back in 1911, I think. She was a founder of the first feminist magazine in Korea. Um, and eventually she became a Buddhist nun. Uh, and uh, and so this is from a collection of her writings, her Buddhist writings. Um, and let's just see, this is from something that she says is she has an essay on prayer and chanting. So when you pray, you should first prepare money, rice, incense, or a candle as an offering to the Buddha. Obviously, everything is the Buddha. So she's saying here, obviously, the Buddha doesn't really need your money or rice or incense or a candle. But for sentient beings, the Buddha has a different meaning. That is, everything is Buddha, right? If you're enlightened, you know that everything is Buddha. But if you're not enlightened, you see the Buddha as someone that you can make offerings to. And sometimes people have an intellectual understanding of the idea that everything is Buddha, but they forget that they're not enlightened yet. And so as long as you're not enlightened, the Buddha is still a being that you can make offerings to. Anyway, so she says you should prepare things properly. You should then pray with great sincerity and in accordance with the proper ceremony. This is how a prayer should be done. So she's saying you should have the right kind of stuff, the right kind of whatever, and to whatever, even if it's just a candle. Um, and then you should try to do it according to the correct proper ceremony. And usually you can find out what the proper way is of doing any kind of prayer or doing Jijang Bosal chanting, for example. But if you are not able to follow that procedure, she goes on, you should remember that Bodhisattva Kuan Yin is on the same level as the Buddha. So up here, she said everything is Buddha. So everything is Kuan Yin. Wherever you are, you should just chant with a single and devoted mind without distraction and in a loud voice. She was a big fan of chanting loudly. Bodhisattva Kuan Yin. So this is this has been translated into English. This is an English translation of her essay. I assume that in the original she just says Kwanse Bosal, which is the way that Korean Buddhists pray to Kuan Yin. Kwanse Bosal, Kwanse Bosal, just like we were chanting before. Jijang Bosal, Jijang Bosal. If you are able, so then she goes on, if you are able to reach samadhi through this chanting, then you will be connected with Bodhisattva Kuan Yin. This is the moment of true chanting when the mind and mouth correspond with each other. This is the place where one reaches oneself, a place in which the distinction between self and other disappears. This is the moment also when the praying person pays the price. And that's this is a phrase that shows up in Kim Iryeop's writings a lot. You have to pay the price. And because of the improvement in her mental maturity, her wish, the person who's praying, her wish, the wish of the person who's praying will be accomplished. This is the secret of success. So that's nice. She goes on, though, to say it is easy when your wish comes true through chanting to forget the mind of chanting as soon as the give and take in the process takes place. You should not be satisfied with the little that you have attained, because even though it is good to get what you wish for in life, a favorable situation brings with it what is unfavorable. And Zen Master Sung often taught this way. He would say a good situation is a bad situation, because in a good situation, yeah, it was what she's referring to here, what Kim Iryeop is referring to, that it was your lack of something that you wanted that drove you to hard practice, that drove you to develop a samadhi, because of something that you lacked and something that you wanted, and this concentrated your mind. Now you have it. So what happens? No more samadhi. And that's what she's talking about. And that's what Zen Master Sung San referred to as a good situation is a bad situation. And a bad situation is a good situation, because the situation that gave rise to this great samadhi was difficulty. It was the difficulty that gave rise to this mind that wanted to practice hard. Now, this person, she has her wish, let's see, because of the improvement in her mental maturity, her wish has been accomplished. And let's see, you should not be satisfied with what little you get to whatever it was that you accomplished through your a favorable situation brings with it what is unfavorable. That is forgetting your practice. Hence, when satisfactory also means what is not satisfactory, what is satisfactory also means what is not satisfactory, which can sound like Zen double talk, but it's really quite straightforward. You get lazy. A satisfactory situation leads to laziness, whereas an unsatisfactory situation can lead to hard practice. Only later will you realize that what you prayed for has eventually turned out to be unsatisfactory, and then you just have to laugh at yourself. Now, Kim Iryeop, actually, she had a very up close and personal. Let's see, yeah, still sharing my screen. So she had a very she was a writer. But she wanted to be a great writer. She wanted to be a famous writer. I mean, she was famous, in Korea, but she wanted to be, I guess, she probably wanted to be world famous. I mean, that's what happens. You get famous locally, then you want to get famous, in your province, and then you want to get famous in your country, and then you want to be world famous. You want to get Nobel Prize for literature or whatever. And so she found this is also recounted in the same book. She found a teacher, a Zen teacher, who was renowned for his ability to give people, mantras and practices that they could use to develop supernatural power to become very successful. And so she talked to this Zen teacher and got a practice from him. And he kind of played a trick on her because she did this practice, and then she realized that all of these great writers that she admired, she no longer greatly admired their writing. She kind of saw through she saw through not just the kind of the emptiness or the shallowness of the desire to be famous, but she also saw that, what people think is famous is very passing and very uh, it doesn't last, and it isn't necessarily that you can find really great writers who are not famous, and many famous writers who are not that great. And so this created a big problem for her. And that's part of how she then decided. So she went from seeking supernatural help from Buddhism to become a great writer, to then seeking, answers to more fundamental questions like, well, what's it really all about? And she became a Buddhist nun. Okay. So this is really, this is from, well, if you click on this link in the slide, well, let's see. Actually, I can click on this link right now, and we can. This is the page at Terra Best. This has, oh yeah, Jin Y. Park wrote the book that translation that I read from is from Women and Buddhist Philosophy Engaging Zen Master Kim Iryeop. Great book. And there's, I mean, besides the little part that I read, there's a lot of other really good, interesting stuff, like the story that I just told about how she went from wanting to be a famous writer to realizing that fame isn't so important, and then thinking, well, now what do I do? Okay, so we should take like a 5-minute break now, and then we'll come back and get into more talking about uh, weird things that have to do with miracles associated with uh, Jijang Bosal. 5-minute break. let's see. Where was I? Is my sound level okay? I should have asked that before. Yeah, everything that's good. Thank you. Before getting back to Kim Iryeop, I do want to look at this is a typical oh yeah. This is from starting on page 169 in Zhiru's book. This is a typical example of one of these miracles stories. So I'm going to kind of paraphrase it, but this is where it is. Mr. Wong died, okay? And then he did not cultivate good acts, and moreover was lacking in moral conduct. When he died of illness, two persons came to lead him to the entrance of hell, where they encountered a monk who said, "I am the Bodhisattva Dizang." Dizang then taught Mr. Wong to recite a line of verse which states, "If a person seeks to apprehend all the Buddhas of the three realms, he or she should contemplate thus: it is the mind that creates all Tathagatas." Okay. Now, if you know the morning bell chant, this is right. This is in the morning bell chant. If you know the Avatamsaka Sutra, then you might know that this is a line from the Avatamsaka Sutra. This is a very famous line from the Avatamsaka Sutra. This isn't necessarily the best translation that there is, but essentially, this is what's often called mind-only teaching or Yogacara teaching. It is the mind that creates all Tathagatas. It's more often, I think, translated as it is the Dharma realm or the entire universe is created by mind alone. And this shows up in several of these, well, at least one other, Dizang, miracle tale, where the person is saved from hell by reciting this four-line little poem. In the morning bell chant, these 4 lines from the Avatamsaka Sutra are followed immediately by the mantra for shattering hell. And so that kind of completes it. if you recite these verses and chant the mantra for shattering hell, then you're really good at it. So not only was Mr. Wong saved from where he was headed, which was hell, he was brought back to life by this. So that's pretty impressive. And that's, anyway, that's a pretty standard example of these kinds of weird tales that we're dealing with here. Now, so the original question that I posed was, how does it work? And what Kim Iryeop is saying is that, if you have really strong practice, if your mind is very sincere, then you can connect with Kwanzaa Bosal or Jijang Bosal, and this pays the price. Kim Iryeop is very big on pointing out that even when Buddhists are praying for something, you never get something for nothing, that you always have to pay the price through your hard practice. And even though that story that I just read didn't really point to this, but generally in a proper Buddhist story of that sort, there have to be other people who are praying to Jijang Bosal for something like that to happen, or Kwanzaa Bosal. Now, Kim Iryeop did point out in that section selection that I quoted, that while one should try to follow the right procedure and make nice offerings, the most important thing is the intensity, sincerity of the practice. Truly sincere practice is actually the same thing as samadhi. Truly sincere practice doesn't lead to samadhi. Samadhi is when you're completely at one with your practice, which is can be called sincerity or intensity, um, and it's also it's also what we mean by taking refuge or paying homage. Um, and this and the phrase "sincere mind" is repeated over and over again in the chant homage to the three jewels, which is one of the basic practices of Korean Buddhism. Um, so now, this is kind of an explanation for how it works, but really it leads to, as is often the case with an explanation, to or the need for more explanations, or actually two more explanations at least. So if practicing with great sincerity can help us to accomplish what we are praying, chanting for, then how does that work? I mean, how, or even better, why does practicing with great sincerity lead to one getting what one is praying for, chanting for? Um, and then a secondary question, but also quite important, is how do you do that? How do you accomplish great sincerity, great concentration, great intensity, great deep samadhi? Um, and so that's actually the easier question to answer, although carrying through on the answer, putting the answer into practice is not so easy. It's the same as the old joke of how do I get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. Or as Zen Master Ikkyu, there's a famous story, which is a little hard to actually document, but people like it. Zen Master Ikkyu was once asked to, give his teaching. Um, and so he wrote this character. This is the character for attention or concentration, or in Japanese it's pronounced nen. In Korean it's pronounced yom. In Mandarin it's pronounced something like nyan. So it's in nembutsu, it's the nem in nembutsu. In nyanfo in Chinese Buddhism, it's the nyan in nyanfo. And in Korean Buddhism, it's the yom in yonbul. These all mean mindfulness of Buddha, or um, mindfulness of Buddha. So this is mindfulness. That's another way of translating this. And so he wrote down mindfulness, and the student said, "Wow, is that it?" And then he wrote down Nen again, and then the student said, "Is that really it?" And then he wrote down Nen one more time, Nen Nen Nen, or Yom Yom Yom, or Nyan Nyan Nyan, or it's often translated in English, attention, attention, attention. So how do you attain deep samadhi? As Zen Master Sung San said, try, try, try for 10,000 years. Or, as I say, when you ask how to get to Carnegie Hall, practice, practice, practice. Okay, so let's say that you do attain that. Let's say that you attain great concentration of mind, deep samadhi, whatever you want to call it. How does that lead to, well, here's another one of my favorite ways of describing this state of samadhi, a profitable unification of the mind. Whatever you want to call it. Why does this lead to the accomplishment of what you are praying or chanting for? Now, in Kim Iryeop, she gives kind of a very psychological explanation for how this works. Because of the improvement in your mental maturity, you will be able to accomplish. So you're just, you're more focused on what you're doing, and so you're better capable of accomplishing what you're trying to do. But that doesn't leave any room for Kwanzaa Bosal or Dizang Bosal or any other Buddhas or Bodhisattvas. Where do they come in? And obviously, Kim Iryeop, even though she kind of gives a what can seem like a purely psychological explanation for how this focused state of mind in your prayer or chanting helps you to accomplish what you're praying or chanting for. She does strongly imply that it still does have something to do with Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And so to really go any further with that, you have to go beyond what Kim Iryeop talks about, even though you can kind of imply it from what she says. Now, another Chinese name for miracle tales is numinous verification, or Ling. Let's see, there's numinous, which is Ling in Mandarin, Yang, whatever. And then Yan or home means verify. So basically, you're verifying the deity, or verifying the being that's being. You're verifying the supernatural power of this being that you're praying to, and that's why these stories are told and retold by devout Buddhists and collected together. In fact, one of the people who was really big on miracle stories was Hakuin. Hakuin, and later in his life, made a point of collecting miracle stories related to people who chanted the Kanzeon chant, Kanzeon, Namu Butsu Yo Butsu and Yo Butsu and Buposo and Jo Rakugajo Chon and Kanzeon Bonen, Kanzeon, Nen Nen Jushinki, Nen Nen Fudishin. There's that Nen Nen is in the Kanzeon chant. And Hakun was a great believer in the miraculous powers of Kano, Kuan Yin, and that those powers could be called upon by chanting Kanzeon. Anyway, but it's still, even though there is a role for the supernatural powers, if you want to call it that, of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, you don't get that assistance for nothing. That is what the price, that is what you're paying the price for. Yeah, if you want to use Kim Iryeop's phrase, okay. And Kim Iryeop, at least in the translation that's available to us, she talks about prayer and chanting, and it's kind of interesting, especially if you are a practitioner of Korean Buddhism, or a kind of Buddhism that comes from Korea, especially if it comes by way of Zen Master Sung San and one or more of his students, such as Zen Master Degak, the founding teacher of Furnace Mountain. If you hang around with people in that part of the Buddhist universe, you'll hear people talking about Kido and Kido chanting. And you'll hear that people say that Kido means energy way. But actually, the reason why I'm bringing this up here is that actually Kido, this is when people say that Kido means energy way, this is on the basis of a mistaken idea about what character Ki refers to and what character Do refers to. There's many characters in Chinese that have the same pronunciation, and so this is an easy mistake to make. And especially when you have something like Aikido, the Korean martial art. It's Korean, isn't it? I think it is. Let's see. Yeah. Anyway, but it is written using one extra character that means harmony, and this is Ki and this is Do. And so it's easy to make this mistake, but actually the first character, pronounced Ki, means to ask for or to pray for, and the second character, Do, means simply to pray. So, and this is a standard thing in Chinese words, where you just take two characters that mean essentially the same thing and put them together to emphasize the meaning. And so whenever people are doing Kido practice, they're essentially praying. Okay, but still, the question is, how does this work? Now, the theoretical underpinnings for how this worked, and so Zhiru talks about this some. She refers to Ganying, this idea of Ganying, which is here, these two characters. This shows up in this chapter. I forget. So sometimes it's translated as stimulus response. I'm getting a message saying that my internet connection is unstable. Do people hearing me okay? Is my picture frozen? Yeah. Okay. Good. And let's see. Okay, so this is from a really fascinating book by Robert Sharf called Coming to Terms with Chinese Buddhism, where he actually has a whole chapter on digging into how does it work when you pray to a Buddha or a Bodhisattva, you chant to a Buddha or a Bodhisattva, and something happens. And Robert Sharf, let's see, it is difficult to, so what Robert Sharf does is he shows how Chinese Buddhists developed a way of explaining this using ideas and words that existed in China even before Buddhism came along. And oh yeah, so remember that I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, people like Isaac Newton, Robert Boyle, Johannes Kepler, Galileo Galilei, Tycho Brahe, Carl Linnaeus. Now, these were all people who were very familiar with ancient Greek philosophy as well. And they did something similar. They were able to explain astrology and alchemy by referencing ideas from ancient Greek philosophy, and basically the idea from ancient Greek philosophy that they made reference to was the idea that the entire universe is interconnected, everything is connected to everything else, and those connections are not random, and that you can come to understand how things are connected, and some of those connections are very, very, very subtle. And so, astrology, how the heck is astrology supposed to work? These little dots in the sky, which actually turned out to be large planets, but the earliest astrologers certainly didn't know that that was the case. Now, by the time Newton and Kepler came along, Kepler, for example, whose mother actually was a witch, she was, so she was a healer. People would come to her for herbs and more than healing. And actually, Johannes Kepler had to spend a great deal of time and energy keeping his mother out of prison because people accused her of being a witch because of her healing activities. But oh yeah, Kepler was the person who mathematically determined the orbits of the planets. That he was the first person to show that the orbits of the planets around the sun are ellipses, I think maybe is the correct. Anyway, so they all relied upon ideas from ancient Greek philosophy to explain the subtle interactions of stuff throughout the universe, including the way that the movements and the positions of the stars and the planets in the sky can subtly affect events, and sometimes not so subtly, and if you believe in that sort of thing, events on Earth. And the reason why I wanted to go back to that is because something very similar happens in China when Chinese Buddhists went about explaining the power of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to respond to chanting and prayer. It is difficult to overemphasize the pervasive force of classical cosmology. So what I was just referring to was kind of classical Greek cosmology. This is classical Chinese cosmology on virtually all aspects of pre-modern Chinese thought. Notions such as sympathetic resonance or stimulus response, Gang, pattern or underlying principle, Li, vital energies or pneuma, Qi, intrinsic nature, Sing. So this is the nature in Buddha nature right here. And sagehood, Sheng. This word actually shows up at least 4 times, maybe 5 or 6 times in the homage to the 3 jewels chant. These all exercise a strong and persistent influence in the areas of alchemy, astronomy, and astronomy, just like Newton and the other people I was talking about believed in. Calendric science, medicine, and government throughout medieval times. It should not be surprising to find these classical theories informing the Chinese understanding of Buddhist doctrine and ritual as well. The Chinese may have adopted Indian formulations of the path and engaged in Indian practices, but this is what's his name, Robert Sharf talking, not me. As I shall show the precise relationships between practice and attainment, or means and ends. So means and ends means, you pray, you chant, and something happens. Of course, in Zen, you're not supposed to be seeking anything, right? Okay, but I'll leave that aside for now. Means and ends continue to be understood in indigenous terms. So they took this Indian religion, Buddhism, but they used their own ideas and concepts to explain things. Okay, yeah, this is also a quote from Scharf. The Chinese conception of the universe as an interconnected, harmonious whole finds expression in theories concerning the cyclic progression of the five phases, Wu Xing. So this is in Xing, this character right here. This is Heng. This is also the Chinese word for practice. You know, when you practice meditation. Um, uh, it has a lot of different meanings. And the yin and yang, as well as the elaborate prescriptions pertaining to the ritual life of the court. The universe, according to this view, is in a state of continual motion and flux. And if you're familiar with the ideas from ancient Greek cosmology that were being used by people like Newton and Boyle, this is very similar. And so Scharf, the guy who's writing this, he's aware of these similarities, and he's kind of, you know, I haven't read this book. I've only read bits and pieces of it. I don't know if Scharf really goes into the similarities between what's going on here in China and what's gone on in Western intellectual history, but he's certainly aware of it. I don't know how much he really talks about it, but anyway, the patterns of change are the result of the cyclic interactions of the five phases and the forces or vital energies, qi of yin and yang, which tend naturally to the direction of rhythmic balance and harmony. Humans do not stand apart from the natural universe, but rather constitute a fundamental and integral part of the whole. That's very important, obviously. The relationships manifest in the patterns of the night sky are reproduced. The regular movements of the heavens accord with the changes of the season, the rise and fall. Everything moves to the beat of the same cosmic drummer, whose syncopated rhythms are captured. He's getting a little poetic here, and can be deciphered in the patterns of lines in the I Ching oracle. Okay. So I've just got one more slide. This is actually from, so this is I wanted to put this up here. This is actually like a very long and detailed review of Robert Scharf's book by Charles Muller, who's another really good author. And he actually while highly praising Scharf's book, he goes through and kind of critically analyzes a lot of Scharf's arguments and a lot of his conclusions as well. So that's a good review to read. Let's see now. Oh, let me go on it here. I should have asked this. I didn't when we came back for the break. Does anybody have anything they want to ask or say, or anybody want to defend Stephen Batchelor? I gave him kind of a hard time. Stephen Batchelor is very popular. There's nothing I can say that will in any way decrease his popularity, and that's fine with me. And I just want to clarify that the problem that I have with Stephen Batchelor is his claim that his preferred interpretation of Buddhism, or his preferred way of viewing Buddhism, is the true original teachings of the Buddha, and that everything else is just made up. And so that's where I don't mind people having their own preferred a way of looking at Buddhism, and everybody has to find their own way of, everybody has to find their own Dharma gate to enter the Dharma. That's what the Dharma gates are for. But then you shouldn't say, all those other Dharma gates are no good. And so the Dharma gate of weird things is very popular. People like to have things to pray to. People like to have ceremonies and rituals to do. People like to have statues and paintings and artwork, and the statues and the paintings and the artwork and the chanting and the rituals and the ceremonies can be appreciated just for their aesthetic value, and a lot of people do. And that by itself, the beauty of it, the poetry and the music of it, is one thing that can attract people to Buddhism in and of itself. In addition to, and then a lot of people just like, the supernatural elements as well. So that's another Dharma gate. And people who are attracted to that Dharma gate shouldn't, get uptight about the people who are more rational and more logical and who don't, believe in that stuff, because that's their Dharma gate. Anyway, I should say that so I don't get in too much trouble in case anybody actually pays attention to what I'm saying, which happens, sometimes. Okay, so there is, I try not to do this with my classes, but I do want to engage in a little bit of promotion for another thing that I'm doing. If I can find it, let's see. It's here somewhere. Oh yeah, I can find it. So I'm going to be leading a once a month medicine Buddha practice. And the first meeting of that is going to be 2 Saturdays from now. Should have had this ready, which I didn't. Oh, here we go. Oh, it's ready. This is the Eventbrite page. So you don't have to register through Eventbrite. This is one way that you can go to it. This is removing all karmic obstacles. Oh yeah, this is not showing me that. So since I created the event, this is showing me the page where I could edit it, which I don't want to do. But anyway, it's the practice is called Removing All Karmic Obstacles, which is one of the titles of the Medicine Buddha Sutra. And so once a month, we'll get together online and read the Medicine Buddha Sutra and do some additional chanting. That is either from the chanting that is either taken directly from the Medicine Buddha Sutra or is or is from Korean Buddhist traditional chanting as was taught by Zen Master Sung-san. So that's my plug, and I'll put a link to this in the description to the video. That's about all I got. So I did, like I said, I think this chapter of Zhiru's book is, it's a bunch of stories about weird stuff that is attributed to the numinous power of Zhiru Bosal. I think it's very interesting, whether you believe in that sort of thing or just like weird stories. Either way, these are interesting, and it's also a a really important window into a very important and large part of Chinese Buddhism that is often not particularly either well known or paid attention to or given respect by Western Buddhists. And I think people should be aware of it. Not only be aware of it, but value that as a Dharma gate. And anybody got anything to say or share or ask or? So there's only going to be one more meeting of the Zhiru Bosal, or no, 2 more. Let's see. That's right. So we've got 2 more meetings. So we're going to cover the conclusion of the book, and then there'll be so will be 2 meetings in February. One will be covering Zhiru's conclusions of the book, and then the other one will be kind of a recap for the book, and maybe an indication of some of the other things that might come out as classes that I'll post on YouTube. Okay, if there's nothing else, then I should put up I think we'll end with the 4 great vows. Which mentioned the Dharma gates, which was kind of a theme in this class. I'm going to share my screen again. Sentient beings are numberless. We vow to save them all. Delusions are endless. We vow to cut through them all. The teachings are infinite. We vow to learn them all. The Buddha way is inconceivable. We vow to attain it. May whatever excellent qualities we have gained from this practice be extended for the benefit of all beings. It's great to see everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Kurt.
Bye-bye.